Hey guys, I'm Rob Younkers. I'm a fashion and costume designer with 20 plus years of experience, an educator, and lover of all things DIY. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to THREADYMADE. THREADYMADE kits bring you New York City Garment District insider access that you've never had before. THREADYMADE pleating and smocking kits are going to allow you to create things that you've never been able to make at home before, and they're going to be key pieces in your new wardrobe. The great thing about these kits, they're accessible to people of all skill levels as far as sewing goes, and we cater to all shapes and sizes, so THREADYMADE is very inclusive. The other fun part, we're going to show you the steps to create these pieces, but we also want to know what you would do with them, how to put your own creative touch on them. So are you guys excited to start sewing? I'm going to walk you through all the steps. Ready, set, go! The Sunburst pleated skirt kit is one of my favorites. I absolutely love Sunburst pleating. I think it's classic, timeless. You'll see it in the past, you'll see it in the future, and now you're gonna make your own. So, this kit comes with everything you need to create one of 3 waistband options. Your first is exposed elastic. This is super on trend, the contrast color is really cool, and it's also the simplest to put together as your kit comes with the elastic waistband already sewn on for you. The intermediate version is the tunnel elastic. So again, it's a pull-on style, but we've created this waist so you're covering the waistband elastic in the same fabric as the a non-stretch waistband. It's going to fit really perfectly on your body. We're going to measure to make sure. And this goes on and off with an invisible side zip. So to walk through the kit contents, everything that you need to create one of these styles is already in your kit. You're going to receive your Sunburst pleated panel. As I mentioned, it already comes with the exposed elastic sewn on if you want to do a really quick going out tonight kind of project, throw something together in an hour. It comes a little bigger than you need. We're going to cut it down to size. There are 2 pieces of fabric cut for waistbands. One is the fabric itself. You can see it's really soft, just the simple fabric. And this is what we would use for the tunnel elastic version, as opposed to the much stiffer fused piece. So this has fusible on the back. You'll be able to tell because this one has no give with the fusible interfacing, and this one's just the soft piece. So this fusible interfacing is applied by just being ironed on, and it's gonna give that waist the body it needs for the fixed waistband, which has no stretch in it. Also, for your tunnel elastic, you have your plain white elastic that will get inserted through the tunnel. And to finish off the fixed waistband, you're going to have the invisible zipper and these adorable little hook and eyes which will close off that side seam. So before making your skirt, we have to measure for your skirt. My suggestion is to measure your waist wearing something that you love. So this is Tiffany. Hi, Tiff. Hi. So Tiff, you're wearing these jeans, and you told me before that you really like where the waistline sits on these jeans. So this is a really great way, you guys, to capture that measurement, is to look at something that exists in your closet. So all I need you to do, and you guys at home, is get a tape measure. So Tiff, you're just gonna wrap this around the waistband of your jeans and meet in the front. Drop it down a little bit. Okay, so we're at 28. This feels like a comfortable spot. Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna take that measurement to the table and pin up the sample. So we have a waist measurement. What you wanna do is transfer that measurement to your skirt panel. Make sure that you start from one side, but we're gonna have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the skirt and 1 inch on the elastic. So I would suggest going in from one side at least 2 inches, you're pinning together, so that you've got room for those seam allowances. So what I'm gonna do is take my ruler, I'm gonna start in 2 inches and give myself a little mark on the elastic as well as the skirt itself. And then from that point, I'm going to measure. And you guys make sure that you are measuring along the stitch line where the elastic is attached to the skirt itself. Can you see this stitch line? So go ahead and measure. Okay. Once you have that measurement, mark the other side. And these are going to be your seam lines. So you can see here that I have, well, first you can see that I've marked on the wrong side, which is where you want your marks to be for this. And I've got 2 inches of seam allowance here. I have good eyes, I can tell it's 2 inches. And 2 inches of seam allowance here. So when we pin this together, there's a little bit of room for movement. Now, the thing that's really important about sewing the side seam of this skirt is that your seam is going to fall in the valley of the pleats. Now follow me here. This is a peak and this is a valley. So what we're going to do is try to match up that seam line in the valleys on each side so that seam gets lost in between the pleats and you won't even see where the seam is. So I'm gonna fold this in half. Now I'm looking at both sides where my marks are. So I am lining up. I'm moving a 1/4 inch over to get into a valley on one side. I'm looking at my other seam line and shifting that a tiny bit so that, I'm going to show you in 1 second here. My pins line up on both sides in a valley. Here, in a valley here. So now we're going to continue to pin down the entire valley on both sides. They kind of sit on top of each other. If you can pin properly, if you can see how I'm lying this one over the other. And I'm just continuing down the entire valley. So Tiffany's back. Welcome back, Tiff, in the Sunburst pleated skirt. So Tiff, I pinned this according to the measurements. How do you feel in the skirt?
It feels really good.
Do you like where it's sitting on your waist?
Yeah.
Let's take it off and let me finish this thing. And let's go ahead and mark all the safety pins down that side seam. Make sure that you hit the elastic as well as the skirt body. You need those measurements. Go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Again, marking the wrong side, the skirt, the elastic. Go ahead and do this side. We'll pull these pins out and remove the chain stitch. So now that we've opened up the side seam again, we want to remove the elastic that the skirt comes with because we're creating a tunnel elastic look. So this is attached with a chain stitch. A chain stitch is a directional stitch that allows for stretch and also can be pulled out very easily from one end. So what you want to do is check both ends of your skirt, grab the thread. It looks to me like this is the one. And you can see how easily I pull the thread. We release the elastic. So pull the entire elastic off. So now we're going to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance from that seam line we just marked. I'm using this chalk. I hope it's not difficult for you guys to see at home, but I love it because it's going to disappear when I iron it. So I found my line. I'm going to mark 1/2 inch away from that line. So you can see here, here's my valley. With my line, I'm marking 1/2 inch away from that line / valley, all the way down. Always kind of checking as you go to make sure you're perfectly at 1/2 inch. So go ahead and mark your other seam the exact same way. Okay, so both of our side seams are marked as well as our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Let's cut the excess off. You want to cut really carefully. Keep that scissor flat on the table. I'm going to find my chalk mark here. There we go. And we're just cutting on that 1/2 inch cut line all the way down. We're going to cut our other side seam. Find that chalk line. So here's our prepped panel. And here's our side seam with 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're transferring that measurement to the elastic that we'll be using for the tunnel waistband. This is a 1 inch white elastic. This will sit nicely inside the yellow fabric. So, grab our measuring tape. Remember, we have seam allowance to think about, so start measuring in a little bit from your edge. You'll have plenty of elastic to cut. So, it's 24. Chalk that. Chalk our other side. This chalk is going to disappear, that's why I like to use it. So we've transferred that measurement. I'm adding a 1 inch seam allowance to our elastic. So remember, the skirt seam allowance is a 1/2 inch. The elastic gets 1 inch on each side. Then we're going to cut off on that 1 inch line. And now we have the elastic for inside of our tunnel waistband. Okay, so we've got our skirt panel ready, our tunnel elastic cut. As a reminder, for the tunnel elastic option of the skirt, we are using the waistband panel that does not have fusible interfacing on it. So it is just like the skirt itself. It's light, it's easy. The other one, just a reminder, is stiffer. It's got the interfacing ironed onto it. So put that aside. We only want the panel that has nothing on it. So what we need to do with this piece of the waistband tunnel is cut it to the exact same length of the skirt. So now we want to measure 28 inches on our tunnel elastic waistband. I'm switching my ruler. I prefer to mark with this ruler. So 28 inches. If your ruler's short, you can just mark along the way. So there's 18 inches. We're going to add 10 more for 28. Now, in order to get a perfect line, measure both sides. And you're going to connect your dots at the 28-inch mark. So go ahead and lay that flat. 18. We are adding 10. Connecting the dots. 28 inches includes seam allowance, so we can go ahead and cut right on that line. Put your scrap aside, and voila, you have your tunnel elastic cut the same as your skirt. Just to be sure, you can walk this across as well once it's been cut. So for now, we're finished with our skirt panel. What we can do is prepare it for sewing. So go ahead and line up the right sides of your fabric. Edge to edge, remember we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And let's pin all the way down that entire seam. Our pins fall right in the valley on both sides. With these fabrics that are a little bit more gentle to handle, I pin closer. So I'm pinning about every 2 inches, all the way down to the hem. And then we're going to put the skirt panel aside for when we head to the sewing machine and work on the waistband. So we've got our perfectly cut waistband. As you can see, the waistband has come cut at 4 inches. So we want to mark on the wrong side of our waistband the center line, because for tunnel elastic, what's essentially going to happen, this will fold in half and this will become your waistband. So we want to mark where that center line is. So since this is 4 inches, my ruler's 2 inches, watch this. You can line up right at the cut edge. Mark those 2 inches. You can do this with dashes. You just want to chalk enough so that you can see it. Every few inches, all the way across. So once you're marked, you want to grab a hand needle and thread in a contrast color. So this is yellow. I can use a blue, a purple, a pink, something that's going to stand out to you. Now that you've got your contrast thread, something that we can see on our fabric very easily, we are going to thread trace. So this is simply a stitch that runs down that center line of our waistband. We're going to use it to fold. It's a placeholder for other marks. So go ahead and starting from one end with about a 1/2 inch in between, pull this through so you guys can see how I'm doing this. So making sure that you're on that center chalk line, nice and straight, with about a 1/2 inch in between each stitch. So it's this basic, simple, in, under, up, all along the chalk. I'm going to turn this so you can see it. The simplest way to do it is just kind of pick it up almost like a gather. So, and pull through. Just make sure that you don't pull it all the way through where you've already stitched. You want to make sure that the thread trace runs the entire length. So once you reach the end, just give yourself a little tail of thread. Now this is going to be your center line. We're going to use this for other markings. So remember, our elastic for the tunnel elastic waistband is 1 inch. So once the elastic is inserted in the waistband, you want to allow a little tiny bit of room for movement, about 1/8 of an inch, because otherwise the elastic can buckle inside. So what we're going to do is mark from our center line 1 1/8 inch on both sides. That 1/8 inch allows the elastic to sit inside the waistband really nicely. So with our chalk, using our thread trace line as a guide, go ahead and mark 1 1/8 all the way across on one side. And take your time with these markings. They're really important. They're going to make putting everything together so much simpler if you've got nice, perfectly lined up lines. So again, 1 1/8 on this side. Go ahead and flip it over. We're going to add 1 1/8 on the other side because this folds down, so they'll match up. So with both of your sides marked, 1 1/8 inch from the center, now you're going to add 2 different measurements. It doesn't matter which side you do it on. So on one side, from the 1 1/8 inch line, go ahead and add a 3/4 inch line from there. As you can see, we're getting really close to the edge. We're going to cut that off after. So 3/4 of an inch down one side. We can flip it around. On the other side, we want to mark 1/2 of an inch from that 1 1/8 inch line. So this is fully marked. What I'm going to do is grab a sample with a darker line so you guys can see exactly what these measurements look like. So what I have here is a sample in the fabric, but I've used a darker mark in pen just for the example. So we have our center mark, which gets thread traced. On both sides of that, 1 1/8 inch away, we've got another line. One side, we then add 3/4, the other 1/2 inch. Then, this is just our visual sample, but you're going to go ahead and cut off the excess. It's very little. Now you've got your waistband all prepared. Go ahead and fold right sides together on that side seam. The seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, so go ahead and pin this. Now we're going to take the skirt and the waistband to the machine and sew the side seams. So now we're going to go ahead and sew the side seam of our skirt on our 1/2 inch line in the valley. We're going to go ahead and sew the side seam of the waistband together on our 1/2 inch mark. Go ahead and sew a straight stitch through the entire circumference that's a 1/2 inch from the raw edge. So now we're going to pin the waistband to the skirt. So what we want to do is pick up the right side of our skirt and flipping to the wrong side of our waistband. So the side we're going to pin on is the side that we've marked with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we can go ahead and line up our two side seams. Again, this is our right sides together. So edge to edge, you can start placing your pins. We're going to go ahead and attach the waistband all the way around the skirt until we get back to the beginning, and it will be a full circle. So we're going to go ahead and stitch the waistband to the skirt with the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the skirt and waistband are now attached. What we want to do is clean finish the inside of the waistband and prepare it to insert the tunnel elastic. So if you guys can get a close look here, we have our waistband, here's our skirt. So what we want to do is a few things at once. Follow me here. So this seam allowance from our waistband, we're going to attach to the skirt. We're going to push up on the 1/2 inch line of our waistband, down towards our waist, and pinning a 1/4 inch below that seam line. So at home, you guys can kind of hold this up to the light and see through that, maybe I can show you here. That inner waistband is a 1/4 inch below the waistband seam so that we catch it all when we sew it. So the only thing you want to do is make sure we leave an opening to insert the elastic. So about 1 inch on each side from our side seam, we're going to leave completely open. So now we're going to continue to pin around the entire waistband, folding on the 1/2 inch line, bringing that down just below the seam line, making sure it's smooth. There's our thread trace line, and continue that all the way around. I would pin every 1.5 to 2 inches. So we're starting at the pin that's 1 inch away from our side seam so that we're leaving room for the tunnel elastic, and we are going to stitch in the ditch. So if you can focus in here, the stitch in the ditch is a hidden stitch that's securing the inside of our waistband to the seam that we have between our waistband and our skirt. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this all the way around. So as I'm approaching the end, we're going to stop 1 inch away from the other side seam to leave this area open on the inside to insert the elastic. Now what I like to do is a dot mark in the center of each side of the seam allowance on the elastic. What this is going to do is help us line the elastic up once it's tunneled inside, and it will help prevent twisting. I'll explain this as we go. So just give yourself a little dot in the center. So as we pull the elastic through the tunnel, what's going to happen is the dots will align one on top of the other, and we'll get a nice even waistband. Sometimes what can happen if you don't have an indicator is as you're tunneling through, it can twist and you get a twisted waistband. So now we want to grab a safety pin. We're going to put that through our dot, and we're going to start pulling one end through the opening we left inside of our waistband seam. Remember, we left a 2 inch opening. That way we can fit our elastic through and start pulling. So what you want to do is put your pin in with your dot side up and start pulling through. So this, you have your safety pin head here. I'm pushing this way and pulling the fabric. So you can continue pushing and pulling all the way through. See, so just pushing, holding this, and pulling the fabric. Making sure as you go that your elastic stays nice and flat, no twisting, and continue all the way around. That opening. And now both ends are out. So I'm going to line those dots up, one on top of the other. Put a safety pin to make sure that I've avoided any twisting. Successfully inserted the elastic. So now we're going to go ahead and create a square stitch to secure our elastic in place before we close it off in the tunnel. So what you want to do is position your machine needle about 1/8 inch from the edge, and we're literally going to sew an entire square, pivoting at all the corners. And now we are just going to put a few pins in that 2-inch area that we left open, and we're gonna stitch the remainder in the ditch. So go ahead and pin that closed. It's about 2 to 3 inches. Going to So now your entire waistband is securely on. We're just gonna clip these threads. Now, something I like to do with elastic waistbands, just to make sure that it doesn't twist around inside, is put a stitch vertically through the side seam. So you see our side seam here. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch my elastic down. This will help keep the elastic even and keep it from moving around within the skirt waistband. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put a stitch in the ditch on one side seam. You can clip those threads. Go ahead and fold your skirt in half to find your other side. Go ahead and put a pin to mark the area, and we're going to stitch the elastic on the other side of the waist vertically through the waistband as well. So now your skirt is finished. You can go ahead and clean up all your threads, pull out your thread trace, and try it on.